Good evening, everyone. It is now 6:04 p.m. on Wednesday, September 7, 2022, and I will call to order this online public meeting. My name is Andy Gregg, and I'm the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Due to COVID-19, regular meetings and public hearings of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission will be held in hybrid format, with both in-person and virtual participation options for commissioners, staff, and the public. This will allow for safe participation by commission members, staff, and any citizen interested in attending. For those of you joining remotely via computer, you should be able to see tonight's meeting agenda on your screen. If you can't see the screen and have joined by phone only, I will be announcing the agenda items as we move through the meeting topics. Members of the public and applicants that have joined remotely are attendees, which means you can see and hear the event if you join via computer, mobile device, or you can just hear the event if you join by phone. Other event participants cannot hear your audio unless you are acknowledged by the commission chair or staff and are unmuted. This evening's agenda is planned as follows: roll call and introduction, prior meeting notes approval, public comment for subjects other than public hearings on this meeting's agenda, as there will be specific public comment periods as part of the hearings. A public hearing for a certificate of appropriateness for the Pierce Goggins House. A presentation by Commissioner Julie Bond regarding her attendance at the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions Forum in Cincinnati, Ohio. Old business and updates, including a discussion of the memo on historic property demolition. New business, including a discussion of the November 3rd Clark County Historic Museum Speaker Series, good of the order, and adjournment. We'll now have roll call of HPC members who are present for this meeting. Please say, "I'm here," after I call your name. Julie Bond.
I'm here.
Morgan Frazier.
I'm here.
Greg Foos.
I'm here.
Heidi Mandler Huff.
I'm here.
Elaine Thatcher.
I'm here.
And Andy Gregg is present. I'd like to note for the minutes that Jan Bader is formally excused from tonight's proceedings. Does anyone have any comments on the draft of the August 3 meeting notes? Seeing and hearing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the August meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the August meeting minutes as written.
Thank you, Morgan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Julie. It's been moved and seconded that the August 3rd meeting minutes be adopted. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Let the record show that the August 3rd meeting minutes have been unanimously approved. We'll now have our period of public comment. We would like to hear from members of the community who would like to ask questions or to make comments. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Jackie, do we have anyone who would like to participate?
For those attendees using their computer or a WebEx application, if you'd like to speak, please use the raised hand icon. If you're calling in on your telephone, press *3 on your phone's number panel to raise your hand. Feel free to now let us know if you'd like to speak. Okay, we've got one caller or one member of the public on WebEx that would like to speak. So Holly, I'm going to unmute you now.
Thank you, Jackie.
Good evening, Holly Chamberlain.
Good evening, commissioners, staff, and guests. It's good to be here, even virtually. I'd like to give you some updates from the Historic Trust in regard to Providence Academy and Officers Row in the West Barracks. At the Academy, the North Porches and Accessibility Project has progressed to the painting stage. If this good weather holds, the project should be done by the end of next week. The demolition of the laundry building and boiler plant and smokestack started yesterday with site preparation. Prep work included archaeological monitoring of the protection of the small unpaved areas next to the buildings. They have been covered with protective layers of geotextile and gravel. Smokestack removal began this morning. The overall demolition is expected to last 4 to 6 weeks. The Academy's Interior Study Grant Project consultant has concluded interviews with an Academy alumna and a former Trust staff member who worked on building rehabilitation to document their recollections on topics such as materials, dates of rehabilitation work, and room demising. This work is funded in part by a grant from the National Trust. The Trust is happy to note that the organization has received a $1 million gift from the Ed and Dolly Lynch Fund at the Community Foundation for Southwest Washington. This provides significant underwriting for the upcoming landscape renovation and other projects. A contract is in the process of being signed with Sarah Architects for the design work. On Officers Row, the Trust was pleased to welcome back participants in the Summer Learning Program for high school student leaders coordinated by the Buffalo Soldiers Museum in Tacoma. This was the first time since 2019 that the students had been able to visit, and it was great to have them back to learn about the service of the Buffalo Soldiers at Vancouver Barracks and tour the site. A high school volunteer has completed current exterior photographs of the 1938 non-commissioned officers' duplexes. DAP had asked for these in connection with the recent Section 106 review of the new air conditioning systems. They will be uploaded into Wizard. Bids are being received by the city for sidewalk repairs along Officers Row. The annual artifact loan agreement between the National Park Service and the Trust has been renewed this time for 3 years for items on loan at the Marshall House, such as the bust of Valery Chkalov. We're also working with the Oregon Historical Society on a permanent transfer of ownership for items at the Marshall House, currently on loan from that organization. The Grant House sunroom window repairs are complete. Broker Deborah Ewing is working with a potential tenant. The Trust and Vancouver's Downtown Association partnered earlier in the year to repair and replant the concrete containers on Evergreen Boulevard over the freeway. The new plants have made it through their first summer and will hopefully weather well over the winter. The statewide peer review of the 2023-2025 Biennium Heritage Capital Projects grant applications took place in late August. The City of Vancouver and Trust application for the Howard House re-roofing and siding repair project ranked 3rd out of 33 applications from around the state. The money still has to be appropriated by the state legislature, of course, and that will be considered during the next session. Again, we sincerely thank the Commission for your support for the grant application. In the realm of announcements, the Trust has completed a summary history of the Vancouver Barracks Waterworks for the City of Vancouver Water Department as a fee-for-services project. And finally, the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation is accepting applications for the annual Valerie Savinsky Fund grants. This program provides grants of up to $2,000 for rehabilitation or for planning, research, and advocacy projects that raise support for a historic or cultural place related to the histories of marginalized or underrepresented communities. And more can be found out about that grant program at preservewa.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holly.
Chair, that is the last person that would like to comment.
Thank you very much. This concludes the general public comment portion of tonight's meeting. Public hearing, certificate of appropriateness for the Pierce Goggins House located at 2511 Main Street in Washougal, Washington. I will open this online public hearing for a certificate of appropriateness application for the Pierce Goggins House. The steps involved in the hearing process are shown on the slide. Do commission members have any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest? Seeing and hearing none, Clark County staff will now give a summary of the staff report and recommendations. Go ahead, Bart.
Good evening. Again, for the record, my name is Bart Catching. I'm Planner 2 with Community Planning, and here tonight to present the staff report summary for the Pierce Goggins Certificate of Appropriateness for the siding replacement and trim repair project. This first slide, introductory slide, just gives you a sense of the current look from the street of the house. And you can see that there's some mature foliage around the property. It's located at 2511 Main Street in old downtown Washougal. A little more background on the property. According to all the records available to us, the house was built circa 1907 by a prominent Washougal family. They're connected to the local mercantile industry and also the Cross River shipping. There's a lot more detail about the family in the record if anyone's interested in getting into that. The house itself is a fairly simple design. It is, as you can see from the picture, kind of a square traditional farmhouse design with a double gable hip roof. So it's pre-Craftsman, but not Victorian. One of the defining features you can see from this picture and the previous picture is that there are large porches, both in the front and the back. Although one of the records that I found researching the property said that some of the posts on the porch were replaced in the 80s, but everything appears to have been, they tried to mimic the original construction as much as possible. The house itself was added to the Clark County Heritage Register in 1990. The nomination, which is included in the application materials, as I said, focuses a lot on the family and the history of how the house was built, and as opposed to some nominations you might find, doesn't really have a copious amount of detail about the house itself. So I take from that that a lot of the importance is more who built it and when it was built and who has lived in it over the years. It is of note, considering the nature of this application, that the nomination does make specific mention of asphalt shingle siding over original cedar siding. So a summary of the certificate of appropriate request here, and you can see this little highlight picture provided by the applicant. There'll be a couple more on the next slide. The applicants are relatively new owners. They acquired the property in March of this year. The main body of the house appears to be completely covered in this asphalt shingle kind of faux shake type product, which some people might be familiar with. I didn't see anything in the record that indicated exactly when it was put on, but it was certainly there in the 80s and early 90s when the property was nominated. And you can see by the state of disrepair and this, or deterioration, not disrepair, but just deterioration, that it's been on there for quite a while. Could be as old as the 50s when that kind of product was fairly commonly used. This picture and the pictures on the next page provided by the applicant will give you a sense that the siding has reached the end of its life. It's failing in multiple locations, both on edges of windows and trim, along flashings. It's crumbling and deteriorating. The original sheathing under the asphalt shingles from what we can tell, and again, the applicant has carefully avoided doing a bunch of demo work or ripping it apart, but from what they can tell and from what we can tell in the record, it's simply the original cedar sheathing, lap sheathing on the house that's underneath. Presumably it's in fairly poor condition in the first place, because that's probably why they clad the whole thing in asphalt shingles decades ago. So as I stated earlier, and we can go into more detail, the request itself is very straightforward. It is to remove the asphalt shingle product and replace it with a new lap siding product. And hopefully the level of deterioration is more cosmetic than structural, and they'll be able to apply it over the old sheathing, because as some of you may know, how these houses were generally built is that there's the stud wall, and then the siding is also the sheathing. So they don't do like we do now, where there's plywood and then a more cosmetic siding over it. The siding is also gives structural rigidity. So it's presumably there and presumably in pretty rough shape, and on top of that covered with nail holes from the asphalt shingles. The applicants have been very proactive, reaching out to us earlier in the summer. This was just the first date that we could bring it to hearing, but we've been communicating with the applicants for several months, getting this application ready, and they very much want to get this project done this season before the heavy weather starts in the late fall. They obtained multiple bids for the work. They chose a contractor that they felt had good confidence and quality workmanship for working on historic houses. The estimate is in the record. I think it's Assured Exteriors, but I could be misstating that. As I said before, the product that they would like to use to reclad the house is a hardy plank product. Some people might call it cement board or cement fiber board. It's very widely used in the construction industry. One might almost say it's an industry standard product, and that is their primary bid and what the applicant would prefer to go with for a variety of reasons. As I stated in the staff report and reiterate here, no structural alterations or changes in use are proposed as part of this project. These are the additional pictures that I thought could really give one a sense of what's going on here. You can see on the picture to the left, the flashing above the porch roof. The siding is literally just kind of crumbling up away from it. It's crumbling in corners of the pieces. It's getting to be gapped away. And then over here on the right is a close-up where you can see a little bit of the weathered old cedar underneath, nail holes, dried cracking, and then some of the failing asphalt siding over that. The staff report contains the detailed findings, but just a quick summary of how we get from A to B here. The HPC, this body, has review authority under Clark County Code 4025030 because the property is on the county registry, and the county has an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Washougal to administer historic reviews. The project does not qualify as an exempt repair and maintenance project, like if they just wanted to repaint or something like that. It's a type 2 commission review because the proposed replacement siding is a different material than the original, in this case, hardy plank instead of lap cedar is the proposal. This is a public hearing, and so the design review section of the rules and procedures is what guides the core of this review. The standards to be applied to the request are the Secretary of Interior standards found in the HPC Rules and Procedures 2008 version is what is applicable here. There are several standards out of the 10 standards that are not applicable to this project, and we won't get into them because there is no change of the structure, no alteration, and the use will stay the same. So the primary focus of the substantive findings in the staff report focus on standard number 4, which basically can be summarized as taking into account changes over time, and number 6, which could be summarized as making the discussion about repair versus replacement and matching the original design, et cetera. So the findings that we have provided, apologies, let me go back. The findings that we have provided come to the conclusion that the removal of the non-original asphalt siding product and replacement with a new lap siding product would respect the character of the house as it was originally constructed. And then further, we find that the siding replacement using a high quality lap siding product is reasonable in this case, given the quite significant cost differential between if one were to go and actually reclad the entire structure in cedar. It's more than twice as expensive, and if one cares to open up the estimate, you can see that we're talking the difference between almost $30,000 to almost $60,000. That's significant for the applicant. I don't want to put words in the applicant's mouth. They can speak to feasibility, but that was a very significant concern for them and why they're requesting the use of the product that they're requesting. It is my understanding that the product can be installed in a way that very closely mimics the traditional lap siding. This picture here that I've clicked to at the end is just from the internet, but it's an older house that's been reclad in hardy plank and it has a similar type of open porch with pillars and the lap look to the siding, and you can see that it can be done very cleanly and tastefully, and especially when it's painted from more than a couple feet away, anybody but an expert wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And when the cement siding product is installed correctly, as we would assume that this contractor would do, it can last a lifetime or longer. So with that, we recommend approval of the proposal as presented, and I'm here to answer any questions and then let the applicant and their contractor speak if they'd like to. Thank you.
Does the commission have any questions of staff?
I have one just clarifying question.
Yes.
So in these images, is the shingle on the top and the bottom portions, or is it just on the top? I couldn't quite tell from the...
There's some shade from the porch, but it's the entire main house is clad in this product, and it looks like it was all done at the same time. But the applicant may have a little more info because they've been around the house more.
Okay. And then I was just curious, are there any photos of the home early 1900s after it was built? Like, do we know what it looked like?
Julie, did you get the
I did, and I read
You
it.
saw the photo in there?
Yeah,
That's the original photo from the
okay.
Historical Society that shows the cedar on the bottom only and the lap on the top.
Okay, yeah, because I thought there was a difference. Okay.
Yeah, that was what they did.
Yeah, that's the oldest picture I've seen, and thanks for digging that up for us, Morgan. I didn't have it in our files in the county records. But that's grainy and black and white, so it's kind of hard to tell exactly what it looked like.
Yeah, the original photo is available. It's at the Historical Museum, and it's labeled. If the applicant is interested in getting some of the original photos to do some of the work, they are available.
Great, thank you for that, Morgan.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions of staff?
Yes, I have a question for Bart. I know cost has been mentioned as a consideration in terms of which material the applicant would prefer to use, but from a staff perspective, is cost consideration that's been applied in other similar circumstances? So in other words, is there a precedent for basing a decision on cost?
I don't have enough institutional knowledge to know what the precedent would be. I mean, that's a great way to phrase that, Greg. What I would say is that two things. I would say, number one, if it was just a 10% or 15% difference or something along those lines, it might be a little easier for folks to swallow. And I would like the applicants to speak directly to that when they have their chance to speak, because I don't want to speak for them. But everyone would love to be able to go and grab original lap cedar siding, and 25 years ago, that might have been a lot more of a economically viable option. But my understanding of the construction industry is it's moved so much more towards using this type of cement board product. It has become the industry standard and an awful lot more economical. And so as you can see from that estimate, it's a significant difference and might be cost prohibitive at this time for the applicant, which then would lead to more seasons of deterioration. That's the impression I got from my discussions with them, and I would, the applicant can speak to that more. Did that answer your question?
Any other questions from commissioners? Would the applicant like to provide any additional testimony?
Hi there. I'm Jackie Kerwald. I'm one of the owners. My husband and I own the Pierce Goggins house. I don't have anything to add. I want to thank Bart and the staff for that thorough report. I agree with everything that was presented there. But might as well take a time to introduce myself while we're here. We're just really honored to be a part of the history of this house. It feels so fulfilling to be a part of this long history. It was really joyful to go back and read some of the things on the nomination about the history and the people who lived here before. We're really honored to be stewards of the home and are genuinely hoping to do the right thing for this house. I can speak to the cost, and I will say that, yes, it is cost prohibitive for us right now. When we purchased the house in March, we went into that purchase knowing that we would have to replace the siding, and that was a big factor in negotiations. So, you all know how hot the market was at that time. We don't have surplus of funds to kind of play with. Unfortunately, my husband and I both just went through career changes, so we're early career again. We have a kid, if that narrative helps. I will also say, though, that in the research I've done with this process, I do think that this proposal will actually keep the aesthetics of it. I think there are very few people who would be able to identify that difference. We really want to keep the same overall image, the same impact in the neighborhood, and I believe this product will do that. And then the other factor that if I'm understanding everything correctly, that this Hardy Lap cedar mill will actually, like it's more hardy in the long run. So it might actually be the most respectful thing for us to do for the longevity of our house. Whereas see more maintenance and might fall into disrepair again in other hands. Again, I'm no expert in that, but these are kind of the factors that I'm piecing together. I don't think I have anything else to add, but I'm happy to answer questions, and just want to thank you for your time with this whole process.
Do commission members have any questions for the applicant?
Is there a material sample available?
You mean something physically that you can touch right now?
Right.
We discussed that internally. We thought that might be overkill, given that it would just be a piece of cedar. I mean, we can provide that if it really would change.
Well, there are different patterns, there are different textures. There's a color issue, so we just don't have any of that presented to us as part of our packet.
Yeah, that's why I put together the representative photos to show how it looks when it's installed professionally.
But that's not the specific material and pattern and texture necessary.
Actually, it was pulled from the bulk of those pictures were pulled from the company's website for that particular product. So that is what that product looks like installed.
But you don't have a sample?
No, I don't have something I can put in your hand right now.
Then a question for either the applicant or staff. Has there been any kind of a structural analysis done to confirm that the weight of the material is not going to be a burden on the structure of the building?
I can chime in about both of those questions, if that's helpful. Regarding the texture, we did choose the James Hardy brand texture that is textured to have wood grain in it, so that like getting as similar to natural wood was important to us. And we've chosen to just keep the same green color to keep that heritage of the aesthetics going. And regarding structural integrity, we have had multiple people look at the foundation, and I don't have any specifics. We didn't ask specifically about this siding project with those specialists, but good news is that our foundation is doing just fine.
But you haven't had an engineer evaluate whether there would be any issue with using that material versus the cedar lap siding as far as the structural integrity of the building?
That's not something that was on my awareness, no. I can also chime in that our contractor is actually on this call also, and I'm not sure if he would be able to answer some of these questions more directly than I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead and unmute Philip. Give me 1 second. Philip, if you can hear us, go ahead.
I can. Hi there, everyone. My name is Philip Smith. I'm the owner of Assured Exteriors and Construction. I'm a general contractor and we specialize in exteriors. I've been in the construction industry since 1988. I've been very familiar with James Hardy product as well as cedar. One of the things that hasn't really been discussed much in this also in regards to this product is Hardy is going to weigh less than the current shingles that are on the home now, the asphalt shingles. They're going to be way heavier. They're going to have a heavier weight load than the actual Hardy. So we'll be going lighter than not heavier on the product. And then on top of that cedar, we no longer have any old growth cedar. So when these houses were built, we do a lot of historic homes and over in Oregon especially. And when these houses were built, they were built with an old growth cedar that had a much tighter grain pattern, and that wood held up much better than it does now. What we get now is a farmed cedar. So they're much younger trees with a looser grain pattern, and they are more apt to curl and shrink and deform and cause a lot more damage. So they're not the cedar of old where it was much harder wood that held up to the environment of the Northwest. So that's why as builders, we've gone away from cedar in a lot of areas unless it's in an accent wall under cover or areas like that where we're not having to worry about the integrity of the home getting compromised from water being able to infiltrate behind the lap area. So I don't know if that helps with anything, but I think it answers a couple of the questions that are brought up.
Thank you.
I would like to ask the applicant. I know that Bart did not see the photo that I sent the other day, but that photo does show so speaking of the history of the house, what was that, asphalt sidings were put there, the Goggins put them there over the original cedar that Bart showed in the photos. And so that's a Goggins addition, and it's obviously failing. But the photo that is in the packet, the older photo, shows the original design of the house, which is the lap on the top, and the protected part underneath, under the porch, was originally held. You know, that's why you probably saw a lot of holes, was because there were cedar shingles on that lower portion. And I was wondering if the applicant would be open to thinking about adding that into the design.
I'm definitely open to thinking about adding that to the design. That is not something I had heard before. It's good information.
I think that so the asphalt siding is not original, and it is ugly, and it is coming down, and nobody's going to argue with you on that one. I don't think, in this group. But now it's the opportunity, like you said, you're the steward, and like what to replace it with. And I absolutely understand the hardy plank versus the cedar discussion that your contractor had with us, because I've had the same conversation with other contractors in the past. And one thing I do like about putting a siding over the original cedar is it protects the original cedar. I don't think that the original cedar is failing underneath. I don't think that is why the asphalt is falling apart. It's been there for almost 70 years. So it's run its life. I would just like to see the house, if given an opportunity, be restored as much, and I think you would probably like it too if you saw this cute picture of the house. Be restored back into kind of what it was in 1907. Maybe we don't get to put cedar siding on top of the other cedar siding, because now we have cedar siding on top of the other cedar siding. And the original cedar siding is still there, so the structure is still there. We want to make sure that that stays there. But, adding some of those cedar shingles to the lower half that's protected, like your contractor said, that you don't have to worry about all the time, and it gives that really nice character and might really bridge a gap that's been missing with that house since the asphalt shingles were applied.
Nice.
So that was all I had to say. I'm not opposed to hardy plank in particular, because it is removable. The things with historic houses is if you're doing something to them, as preservationists, we like to know that you could undo it. Like if somebody really was like bought the house and was like, I'm taking it back to the cabin look, they could do it. So that was my suggestions for the applicant.
Thank you. And I'm assuming, Bart, that that's something that you could forward to me, forward communication.
Yes, I'll get the best quality versions of those documents that Morgan mentioned as I can, and I'll make sure that you and Philip have those.
Thank you.
I just wanted to confirm, I think I'm hearing that the hardy plank would be going over the original cedar, that we wouldn't be taking down the original cedar. Is that correct?
This might be something, again, that Philip can answer better than I can, but my understanding is that's absolutely the goal. And we won't know until the shingles come off if that's realistic, considering the shingles have openings to the elements, that it might be compromised. And that's just not something that we can promise yet at this point.
Philip, I have muted you if you have anything you want to add to that.
Okay. So your question is if we would be removing the cedar siding?
Yes, correct.
So we aren't even sure the cedar siding was left in place underneath on the top section as described from the picture. I haven't seen this picture, so I'm imagining it said it was lap siding on the top. Usually they use a shiplap in other areas. There's probably shiplap underneath all of it with maybe a lap on top. As who the gentleman in the beginning was describing is the shear wall. They didn't use plywood. So we would be leaving all of the cedar shear wall intact and patching it in as needed if there was any rotten areas or damaged areas. When asphalt shingles are put on, there's 5 nails per row. So there's lots of nails per shingle put on there to hold those on. And typically it's just riddled with holes and no longer salvageable siding at that point. So it's not deteriorated or rotten, but it's been penetrated by so many nails that it's not really feasible to be as used besides anything besides the substrate for new siding.
Right, but the hardy plank would be kind of going over it as a cover. You wouldn't be like removing the cedar and then putting the hardy plank on. That's kind of what I'm.
No, yeah, well, because it's the shear wall, yeah. So we'd be using that as your as a structure for holding the hardy.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was thinking that you guys were saying. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, for Philip, did you say that you believe that the top of the house is a different construction?
Well, that's what I was, just from what I was hearing from you guys in the picture, that it sounds like there's 2 different styles of siding. And somebody in this conversation, I haven't seen the picture. So
sorry, that was me, Philip, sorry. That was me.
I'm just going off my visual in my mind.
What I was, and I'm sure when she gives you the beautiful photo, you'll see what I'm saying. So historically, and you've seen these houses, there's just the siding, like you said, there's just the siding, and for years the siding was, painted or shingled.
Yes.
And like you said, it is a sheer wall, and I that's all the way up. It's just that they took the time to do that cedar shake where, like you said, in a place where they weren't going to have to maintain it all the time. It's like easier to just paint, than to worry about your cedar shingles deteriorating.
Because they're on the bottom half.
Yeah, we can we can also do a hardy shingle that mimics the cedar shake also. To keep everything kind of looking the same throughout.
And I have to say, Morgan, I'm wrong. I didn't see that photo. I saw other ones that I thought you were referring to, but I didn't see that historic picture. That's what I was hoping to see.
Yeah.
So, okay.
That's when I found it. I sent it to everybody. I was like, okay, this is the oldest one I could find.
I'm sorry, I was out of town, so I didn't.
That's okay.
Yeah. I don't have any real salient new points to make that haven't already been made. This is Julie. I'm one of the commissioners. I will just say, I really appreciate that you are, being as conscientious as you can to do the right thing for the house, and as you said, to be stewards for it. So I really appreciate that, Jackie. And it sounds like, the contractor you have selected has experience with historic structures and has some options that even if you need to go back and take a look at that historic photo and see how you may want to adapt the plan to, as Morgan said, I'll go back to what she said. For me, there's no question that you need to make these repairs and that you need to make them soon to protect the house. But it does seem to make sense that this is a good opportunity and time for you to maybe take a look at that photo and then see if your plans can be adapted to more carefully match that historic design of the house, and that you're choosing materials that, like you already are, that are suitable to do that. That was all I wanted to say, but thank you, Jackie, for that, you and your husband and your contractor for being thoughtful in how you have put these plans together. I don't know if that requires another, is that just a suggestion we would make then? Or I don't know kind of how that.
Well, I think that, I think we are still at the questions of the applicant
I know, I always
portion.
tend to jump ahead.
Yeah. First slide.
We will now open the public comment period related specifically to the Certificate of Appropriateness application. Please note that if you wish to retain the ability to be a party of record on this matter, or to challenge or defend any decision made on this matter, please state and spell your name and provide your mailing address or email address for the record. Do we have any public comment?
Thank you, Andy. Let me just remind everyone that's at home, if you'd like to make a comment, please use your raised hand icon if you're using on your computer or tablet. And if you're calling on the phone, *3 to raise your hand. And let's see. Chair, I see no hands raised.
Thank you, Jackie. The public hearing is now closed. The commission will now deliberate. The commission must make findings that either agree or disagree with the staff's finding on each criterion or make specific comments on any finding. So what we'll do is we'll have a deliberation, and we'll have new comments that haven't been read into the record so far. And then at the conclusion of the deliberation, we'll accept a motion in a second, and we'll vote on this matter. So any further comments or information from fellow commissioners?
I guess just a general comment that in the future, if staff could bring us a material sample, a color sample, so that we can, firsthand see, the texture, the pattern, the color, rather than see a picture, that would be appreciated.
Agreed, Greg.
So we'd like specimens.
Yeah, we actually brought this up at the last Certificate of Appropriateness, that it's really hard for us to sit here and make decisions on people's, descriptions and photographs sometimes. So it does really help for future applications if we could get samples.
I'll note that.
I guess we need to discuss this other than looking at each other. So I would just say, I feel like the proposal makes sense to me, the materials and the thoughtfulness that they've put together in the design. The only thing that I would echo is what we've already discussed, which is taking a look at that historic photo and really using that as a guide for moving forward with the final design. Whether or not that needs another review, I guess that's something I don't think is necessary. I think that's really, between the staff and the applicant, I guess. So, but anyway, otherwise, I do think that these repairs are pretty urgent, especially since we will be soon going into the rain season. So, I think the proposal.
Is that a motion to approve?
We're still deliberating.
Okay.
That's just my feedback for this proposal, for this.
And I concur. I think that as we said before, that they need new siding, and they cannot get. And I really don't think that. I think it was just originally painted, and then the painting got too much, and they put the shingles on, just like people put vinyl siding over cedar shake houses. I feel confident in the contractor that they've worked with historic homes, and yes, there'll be a lot of nail holes, but I'm sure you can repair those to put the hardy plank on top of it. And, for me, the materials was the sticking point. Though that wood came from the Stevenson Mill, and was milled locally from those giant cedars that are no more. So the house is really part of that living legacy of some of the last big cedars that came out of Stevenson. And so, whereas, you know, it might be old and it might have a ton of holes in it, it's actually really special wood. But I don't see a problem putting hardy plank over the top of it rather than cedar. I understand the cost, you know, the costing of it. I mean, I just would, personally, if it was my house, I would probably put hardy plank on it, you know, but I would probably put the cedar back on and the gingerbread back on, you know, the gingerbread trim back on, and make it, you know, look like that cute little historic house in downtown Washougal that it almost is. So I'm all for, you know, the proposal, and I feel like I can trust the applicant and the staff and the contractor to make the right decisions.
I generally agree with my fellow commissioners, and I think that this is a good material to protect the long-term integrity of the building, but I do have a concern about the structural capability of the building and the foundation to handle that, and I know that their contractor definitely will ensure that appropriate decisions are made. But, you know, I just took a quick look online, and it said the weight per square foot of hardy board material is in the is more than typical wood siding would be. Now, he did mention that the asphalt shingle siding is heavier, which, you know, it's possible, I'm not sure, but it just doesn't seem like it's been investigated in depth, particularly, you know, looking at the nomination information. It said the house was built basically on a riverbed, and that, you know, having been built in the early 1900s, the foundation is probably certainly not up to current standards. So it's just something that I would urge the homeowner to look into before applying a material like this that's substantially heavier than what the house was originally built to take, and that was when it was in its prime original state and not 100 years later.
Heidi or Elaine, any input from you?
My inclination is also that I'm in full favor of this. I think that the house needs to be protected, and that sounds like the contractor knows what he's doing here.
Thank you, Heidi. Elaine? Any further deliberation? We'll now accept a motion, including the finding. Please say your name when you're making the motion and second, so staff can capture it for the record.
This is Julie, and I will make a motion to approve the proposal with the note that they will consider the historic photo and what they can incorporate into their design.
Second.
Okay. Greg has seconded. It's been moved and seconded that the certificate of appropriateness to be approved. Bart, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Julie Bowen.
Aye.
Morgan Fraser.
Aye.
Greg Foos.
Aye.
Heidi Mandler Huff.
Aye.
Elaine Thatcher. Well, we may have lost Elaine on the feed, so we'll have to check on that. Jackie, is Elaine still on the list?
Yes, she's still here, but it seems like she might be having audio issues. Elaine, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
There we go.
Sorry, I have very little voice right now. I'm trying to say I.
Oh, thank you.
We're sorry.
Sorry, Elaine. Can you eke out a yay or a nay?
Yay.
And Andy Gregg.
Yay.
So you have 6 yays, 0 nays.
The certificate of appropriateness has been approved unanimously.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks to all of you. Appreciate it.
We'll now have a presentation by Commissioner Julie Bond regarding her attendance at the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions Forum.
And Jackie's running this, so you can
Okay.
tell her next slide.
Okay. Do you mind making it?
Give me 1 second, Julie. I'm going to fix it so that it doesn't do the presenter mode on me.
Okay.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Oh, it's all right. Hold on. I got to work around. Hold on. Okay. Here we go. Does that look
great.
right?
That looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, I wanted to just come back to the commission, thank the commission for approving the budget for me to go to the forum. It was a really great opportunity. I feel like I learned so much, and it was just a really enriching experience. So I wanted to come back and share some of the things I learned and present some of the takeaways that I got from attending, that I think that we could actually apply some of these things to our commission. And I wanted to just give you an overview of the events. So next slide. So this is what I want to just go over with you. I wanted to talk through each day, what I did. So the first day I attended a short course that I will review in detail. The second day I attended a field trip opportunity that they gave us. It was an all-day event. And then the third, fourth, and just the morning of the fifth, that was the last day of the forum, and there were only 1 or 2 sessions in the morning that I did attend on the fifth, and then that was the end of the forum. And I'll go through just a few highlights from the sessions. Then I want to go over the critical takeaways and some proposed actions that I would like to put forward to the commission, and then any questions and answers and next steps. So next slide. So these images are from the forum. So the first one, can't see too well on the presentation, but it is an image of the Purple Bridge, the Purple People Bridge that leads into Cincinnati from Kentucky. And the second, third, and fourth images are of the hotel where the conference was held. That's the Netherland Hotel. It's a historic Art Deco hotel, and anyway, it's a wonderful venue. And so that first day that I was there, I attended a short course that was an MAPC short course. So its purpose was to provide training on things that were really critical to both commissioners and staff. And it was a high-level training, but it covered a lot of ground, but it was actually also gave some really important and interesting insights. So the first part, and each part had a different presenter that was an expert in the particular topic that they were reviewing with us. And so the first presenter basically gave us a foundation of the NAPC, what they're there to do, and how they can provide support to commissions and kind of their function and purpose. And then they had a presentation on why we preserve, and they introduced this topic of place economics and how preservation is really a positive for setting up cities and towns and communities for economic prosperity if preservation is adhered to. And they went through some of those place economics research studies and some other things. And there's a website, and it's called placeeconomics.com, and it's a really great site where you can find a lot of different studies. They specifically are specialists who analyze historic preservation impacts of the economy. So they have a lot of really interesting reports and insight if we ever are interested in seeing those or reading about them. Then the next presenter reviewed the commission members' roles, and even though I felt like, you know, I kind of understand what the commissioners' roles are, I felt like I learned from every single session. They always had something new to add, but the main things that they were highlighting were our responsibilities and our roles to do community outreach, to be preservation advocates, and to help educate about historic preservation. And they had some really excellent kind of just review of those three kind of main highlights. And then the third presenter went into depth about incentives and benefits for people to do preservation, not just homeowners, but also developers, and what those incentives were. She went into very great detail. I have some copious notes that I took that I'm not going to necessarily verbally share with you tonight, but they were very, it was just very interesting to see the breadth of how much is out there that can benefit developers to do historic preservation. Some of them are tax credits, easements, the TIF, which is a tax incremental financing, and other avenues for incentivizing preservation for all spectrums of developers, whether it be small-time homeowner just preservation up to large developer projects. Next slide. The fourth part, which is a part I'm actually going to focus a lot on in this presentation, but I will save it for down the road for a few slides. But we discussed standards and guidelines that we have at our disposal as commissioners, and they named the ones that we all know about: the National Register standards, our historic districts or local register standards and guidelines, the Secretary of Interior standards, our local ordinances, local design guidelines, and then, of course, the commission that can approve or disapprove a certificate of appropriateness. And I have a little link there that's that I can share later, but I just wanted you to see it. They didn't mention this in the presentation, but I was so inspired by this review that I was doing a bunch of research, and I found this site, and it's the napccommissions.org site, and it's specific to design guidelines throughout the country. You can search by state, and then if a commission has provided them with those design guidelines, they're available to you to access and see and review, and I'm going to show you a couple in a minute. But the things that they really highlighted was that the components of design guidelines have, the ones that are the strongest have these 4 components. They have a background about the guidelines, the design of what they're going to be overviewing in that document, the policy behind it, the guidelines themselves, and then they provide photos of what it looks like. They may provide images of what not to do and what to do, and it really helps set those parameters. And the design guidelines are really important because they're used by everyone. They're used by the stewards of the property, so the property owners. They're used by the applicants, if they aren't the homeowners themselves, the commissioners, commission staff, any appeals bodies, and also the contractors. So they're really, really critical. And then the 5th part of this short course was about meeting procedures. And again, I thought, you know, I feel like we have those down, but again, I learned a lot in this session. She went through detail of the whole spectrum of roles, even people that we only see from time to time, like the attorneys and some others from staff that we only see on occasion, and the procedures of the meetings, and then best practices of how to be the best commissioner that you can be, best staff person, best whomever you are, whatever your role you have. And then she also gave some tips of things not to do. And so I found it very insightful and was really helpful because I was definitely doing some of those not to do's, and it really helped me just articulate a little bit better than perhaps I was, because now I understood a better way of doing it. So I found that really helpful. Let's see. Okay, so next slide. So the second day was that day I mentioned. I went to I did a a field trip, and the field trip was to Dayton, and it was a full day of activities, but the first half of it was touring this arcade building, which is in Dayton, and it's this massive development project that, again, they were working with a really large developer, but they were using their various historic preservation incentives, but also were working very closely with historic preservationists to do a lot of the work. And it's actually at 5 buildings kind of linked together. That first image is the front of one of the buildings, and that second picture is like this beautiful atrium that they restored, and it's quite stunning. And they restored the floor. Before, they had cut out the original floor and built stairs that kind of went down to the lower level, and they had made a lot of significant changes. And so this developer was taking it back to kind of more of that original design, but they were also being very innovative about who they were bringing into the space and how they were renting the spaces for the community. And it was really a great revitalizer for the area, and also a lot of economic build-up for different small businesses and the community itself. So it was a really interesting project. We walked through that, and they gave us, the developer was there giving us a full tour and explaining how they did the restoration. And then the second part of the day, we did tours of their, both of Ohio history and also the history of the Wright brothers and aviation. So we did, you can see there, we went through the Wright Dunbar neighborhood, and that first image, or the third image, I should say, is the Wright brothers' very first bike shop. They were bike shop owners first, and this is the actual original building that they lived and worked in, and right around the corner was their home. And so it was fun to tour this neighborhood, because you could see, this is where they walked and they got their inspiration, and this is the environment that they were in when they were designing their flights, how to do flight mechanisms. So it's really interesting. And then they had the National Park Service manages this property. They also have a museum nearby. So we did a lot of that, kind of delving into that history. That fourth image is their home. The brothers, after they made their mark, they built this home, and this was their home moving forward for the rest of their lives. And so we did a tour of that home, and again, it was very interesting to see the community that they lived in, they influenced. And we also went to another historic park that demonstrated a lot of change makers, I guess you could say, from Ohio over the course of the last century. So that was also very interesting. And since they were the hosts, it seemed appropriate to learn more about their history and the people that were produced by that community. Next slide. Okay, so this is about day 3, 4, and part of 5. Like I said, I'm not going to tell you every session that I went to, but there were some really interesting ones. There was a session on archaeology and cultural landscapes, and there were several presenters, but Hopewell Mounds is just a phenomenal site. I've not been there, but actually after hearing this, I was quite amazed. But it's actually been nominated to be on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So they were talking a lot about the significance of the site and the heritage, their partnerships with the different Native American tribes that have a stake in keeping these sites sacred and respected, and then they talked about the impacts that if they do get nominated and they do become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, what that means to the site, how they are going to, kind of some of those questions they have to grapple with. How are they going to develop the site without negatively impacting those qualities that make it special? So it was a really fascinating presentation. They did some other, again, archaeology and cultural landscape type presentations. So another one was rice harvesting and how important that is to Native American cultures. And it's wild rice, and they presented how they do the collection of it. It was really quite fascinating, and how important it is to their food security, but then they also use it as an economic development. They sell it. You can actually purchase it. It's called White Earth. And it was really an important staple to their economy, and yet it's being threatened because there's water pollution that's infecting the waterways that they do the rice harvesting. And so there was that preservation element. How do you preserve these cultural landscapes from kind of external factors that influence them? So really excellent presentation on that. They also had different events in the evenings. One of them was at the Union Terminal, which is also a preservation project from the past. They had restored this terminal years ago. I don't think it was a recent project, but they were very proud of the restoration. It's absolutely gorgeous with really phenomenal murals inside. And then and then we also had another event that was held at the Memorial Hall, another recent historic preservation site that they restored, and that was a recent one. It was, and I don't have an image of that on here, but it was a successful rehab project, a lot of community involvement. And then there was another really interesting, actually a presentation I went to is fascinating, but one of the ones that I thought was really poignant was they have, Cincinnati has murals everywhere in the city you go, and they're gorgeous. They're so detailed and intricate and relevant. This one that I have here on the slide is of Martha, the last passenger pigeon. And apparently she was in the zoo there in Ohio, and she was the last of her kind. And she actually died a little while ago, I think a couple years ago, and they did this mural in like a memory of her. And so their mural projects really are not just great for the communities that they're painted in, but they're also great ways to teach young people new skills. So there were all these really great benefits of their mural. They have many projects throughout the city, but the historic preservation, and often they were on historic buildings. And so there's that historic preservation partnership that was really, really positive. And at the same time, they realized they needed to have some preservation guidelines on how to do mural projects so that they're not negatively impacting the historic buildings. And so that was also very helpful to see, okay, they can have a successful mural program throughout the city and still protect their buildings. And people were interested in having those guidelines, so they were doing the right thing. And then one of the other presentations that I thought was worth mentioning was there was an open source software program. It's free for all commissions all over the world, and they did this really interesting presentation about using this application and how it can be used to create historic property inventories. There's a lot of, they did some really great demonstrations of different preservation, either cities, or they did some from England, they did some from Los Angeles. They had like various examples of how people apply it, but it was a very interesting digital platform that people were using with great impact for their historic preservation commissions. So I thought that was worth noting. I think we can go to the next slide. So these are some of the critical takeaways that I wanted to share with you. There's kind of four main themes. So there were themes of guidelines, advocacy, training, and outreach. And I'm going to review each of those four specifically with some recommendations or some things that I would like to just suggest. But for the guidelines, and I'll go into those in a minute, but just to kind of give you the high level. So for the guidelines, having local design guidelines really is a critical component that I think that we are missing in our commission. And within the guidelines of that level, we could include standards for murals and also any environmental upgrades, because that will be something that I think we will encounter in the future. And cities are finding that they don't have guidelines for them, like say solar energy. What do you do if you want to put solar energy on your historic home, and some other environmental upgrades that are important. But how do you do that? How do you kind of create that partnership that works for both? Then the advocacy piece, having a why preserve PowerPoint that we can share or advocate our kind of our Historic Preservation Commission message to both the public, but also to our elected officials who appointed us, and have that dialogue with them, create that, again, that collaboration is an important aspect that we could incorporate. Some trainings, there's a training called CAMP. Some of you may already be familiar with it. I wasn't. It was a new thing to me. NAPC hosts it, and they can tailor it to the commission and the needs of the commission. They have a lot of different curriculum that they can it's basically, you know, make it your own. And I after talking with other people at the forum, other commissions within Washington, people that I met there were like, oh, you know, maybe we can partner together and we could host a camp, and your commission and our commission could get together and have one of these trainings, and we could share the cost, but then also, you know, have this interaction between commissions. So that was one thing I took away from that. And then outreach, also from some of those conversations, how lovely it would be to have a historic preservation, a local context newsletter that could be a really great resource for homeowners or either for homes, residential, or for commercial property owners, but people who are owners of historic properties, and that mapping arches, that mapping software that it's free, it's open source, that it could be a potential resource that if it's reviewed and it could be something that we can maybe benefit from. So, next slide. Okay, so these are some proposed things that I wanted to bring forward, and this one's specifically in relation to the design guidelines. So what I would like to propose is that we create a subcommittee that can essentially do a literature review. That site that I had mentioned earlier, we can search by state and see what's out there, what kind of design guidelines people have put together, and find out what works for us. What are our needs? What needs would we like to see fulfilled in a type of guidelines? I think several meetings we have said, well, do we have anything that tells us what a window should look like? Do we have guidelines about what XYZ should be? And this type of document would help us already have those parameters in place. So the subcommittee would essentially decide what our needs are, and then ultimately the goal would be to write a grant proposal to have those design guidelines written and developed for us, either through a SHPO or a DAP grant, and that this would be a proactive approach to get people together to figure out what we need, how we want it to look, what context we want, and really have a really strong proposal written in advance proactively so that when those grants come open, we have something to present. So that was one proposed action step. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this next slide is just an example. So we currently have this great document, the rules and procedures document, and in there we do have the design review process outlined, but it's not so much the design criteria, like the design guidelines themselves. So this is how we do the design review, but there isn't that guidance on what the design should be. So just wanted to note that we do have some really great materials, and we can also benefit from developing some new ones. So you can go to the next slide. So this is an example of, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of different design guidelines that I found online. This one was from Louisiana, and I just wanted to kind of show how they have it broken up. So that first little section is just their cover page, and it kind of shows you some of their historic resources in their community. And then the first 4 chapters really provides kind of that groundwork, gives the history of the area, what historic preservation is, what this document is intended to do, and really gives some kind of also some architectural elements of what are key historic architectural elements that are going to be in this guideline. And then the next green little block is chapter 5, which basically goes through each element within their community. So they have one for awnings, one for fenestrations, which are doors and windows, so on and so forth, of how to do rehabilitation on those things for residential properties. And then they also have a section for commercial. And then the next chapters go into even more detail for best practices for both. So they have a lot of just wanted to kind of give you a sense of the content. And then they also, of course, include the Secretary of Interior standards also up front, so that they also know what the basis of these guidelines are. They refer back to those standards of rehabilitation. You can go to the next slide. And this is the same, within the same guidelines. I just wanted now you saw the cover and the table of contents. This is what it looks like when you actually get down to one of the guidelines. So this one is for porches and stairs. So you can see how they have a background section that that explains why porches are significant to the rehabilitation, to the historic property, and the stairs. Then they have their policy outlined, so it's easy for them to identify, like, what is it that they need to understand and do when they are making their design. And then the next one is the guidelines themselves, and specific to porches. Later on, they have one for the stairs, but I didn't include that. So they have 10 particular guidelines that they need to undertake when they're doing their design. And then the next thing they have are these images, and they had multiple pages, and you can see the different types of porches in their community of, you know, what is suitable. And then they reference, I put that on the side, I reference the National Park Service briefings that provide the technical information for those guidelines. So that's just one example. You can go to the next slide. I have a couple examples here because they're different, and this is why I think a subcommittee would be helpful to kind of troll through some of these and see what is suitable for our context. But again, this is another way of organizing it. This one, they have, I just showed the table of contents. They have their different restoration guidelines, the residential, and then they also have their commercial. And then they have the Secretary of Interior standards, and then they also have their design guideline principles. They also developed something additional to that. And then for this example, they have their awnings, and even though it's not labeled, they still have their kind of their background or their purpose, and then they have their guidelines themselves, and they have some images. So it's interesting because they chose to have these drawings or renderings of what is appropriate and how to apply those guidelines. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so I thought this one was also very interesting. They took it a different way. So similar content, just structured a little bit differently. And they have all of their guidelines for windows and doors all in one place. So it's all text, but you can see they have 16 different things that the person who's doing their design needs to look through to create their proposal. And then they have this other kind of interesting visual of, you know, replacing versus restoring and why that's important and how to do that and so on and so forth. So I thought it was an interesting approach also, different ways of looking at it. You can go to the next slide. It says example 4, but it's still on the same example. So this is actually, if you were to drill down into that previous page, and this one's for masonry. So they have a whole overview of masonry. They have care and maintenance instructions. Then they have the guidelines for masonry, and then they have images. So they have in the red block, you can see how that, they're saying this is inappropriate. These are not ways to do the preparation for masonry. One in green is the way you do want to do it. The second one is how you fill it in. The one in red is how you do not want to do it, because they explain why, how their water can infiltrate. And then they have the green of what you do want to do. So they have there's different ways to approach and different elements that you would like to include to, again, be helpful to all of those parties that I mentioned earlier that will be using these. And then I have one more, I believe just one more I wanted to show you. So you can go to the next slide. This, again, is another approach. This one's for masonry as well, and they lump all these different types of masonry together. And then they have this first section that kind of provides some background and information. They have a lot of images in their community of the different types of masonry. And then I thought this was interesting because they do break it into, you know, the building exterior, what is recommended, what is not recommended, how to clean it, what is recommended, what is not recommended. You can go to the next slide. And then same thing, how to repoint and repair masonry, what to do, what not to do, painting and sealing, what to do, what not to do. So there's different approaches, different ways to take a look at it, but it just demonstrates that this is a really important document and it really helps a lot of stakeholders and I think could alleviate a lot of stress on the part of many people. And I think it's also really just a great practice for Commission to have, especially after walking away from this forum that demonstrated that this was, and they challenged us and said, if you don't have design guidelines in place, go back to your commissions and, you know, propose that you put them in place.
That's serious.
I'm doing it, yeah. But I see a need. I see a need every time we meet, that we need something like this. And not just us, but the applicants, the stewards of the buildings, I think staff, everyone can, the contractors, everyone can benefit. Okay, so that's the end of the design review criteria that I was specific examples that I want to show you, but I have one more slide for the design guidelines. So this one is in relation to the murals. I just have those images again, just another example. They just had beautiful murals everywhere. I just couldn't, I mean, it's just incredible. But they do have those guidelines in place. And so I think it's also, if we do take this on, that we can look at what Ohio does. What do they do in their mural program, and do we want to adopt some of their guidance? But to not forget that there are some other pieces that we don't currently even talk about really, and that we may want to include if we're going to take on this effort. Okay. So next slide. Okay, so going back to those proposed steps, then there's the preservation advocacy, having a why preserve PowerPoint. I also would suggest, you know, for the advocacy approach, to have another subcommittee that can develop that why preserve presentation, and to use that report of, you know, they did a report of 24 reasons historic preservation is good for your community, and that we, in that subcommittee, take 5 to 10 of those particular reasons and localize them, make them relevant to our context, and then develop that presentation of why do we want to preserve here in Vancouver, in Clark County. And then to use that just as an outreach effort, just to demonstrate to our elected officials that appointed us that we are, you know, we are being advocates and we are taking this role seriously, and that it's important. And then training, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we could consider as a group whether or not we would like to explore the camp, and if that training would be helpful to our commission. And if it is, if it's something we could put into our next budget as a line item, and if we wanted to share that with another commission, if we wanted to do some outreach to some other commissions in our area, if they would like to join us and or design what we would like to get out of that. Next slide. And then the last element, which is outreach. Talking to some people at the forum, and I've talked to other people here too, with commissioners that are gone, but having a historic preservation newsletter, and not, you know, working in collaboration with our staff to do that, not just saying, hey staff, we would like you all to do this, but to actually really work together, create kind of what do we want in a newsletter, who would we be reaching out to, how often would we do it, what's the context, who's contributing to it, but that it could really be a great platform to inform our all the people that are on the historic registers that we have of different efforts that are going on in the historic preservation community, and really create more of that outreach to them and help them feel more like they're part of a community that is active and has some things to share with them. And then the next one is in reference to our maps, and you know, we have one historic neighborhood that is on, I believe, the National Register, or maybe it's the Washington Register, but we've not done any, since I've been on the commission, we haven't done any outreach to them, or anyway, I just think that there's some gaps in things that we could do for our outreach. And so if we already know if we already have these maps and these inventories, we could, again, create a subcommittee to kind of look through what do we have, what is our knowledge base, and are there gaps, and are there things that we can contribute to filling some of those gaps, and do we even have a role, or is there an opportunity to help kind of close some of those gaps, for lack of a better word. And whether or not that, again, I don't know enough about Arches to say anything about it, but just that was put forward as one of those mapping opportunities. And I know we already have some things that we use, so it may not be relevant, but just having that dialogue as a subcommittee to kind of come up with some of that future plan, if that's, again, something that they decide that we would like to move forward with. So next slide. Just there's one more thing. So we are members of the NAPC. They have a newsletter, but I have no idea how we get access to that. So how do we get access to that? I was just putting that question out there. And then we have other memberships, and I'm curious, how do we access them? You know, we pay our fees each year, but how do we actually access those resources? I don't really know. So that's the question I wanted to put out there. I would like to share the different PowerPoint presentations that were at the forum. They've shared them with me, and I think it's fair for me to share them with you. So I need to connect with you to help distribute those. I don't know exactly how to do that, so. So that's it. The last thing is just questions, comments. Any thoughts on all of that information that I've just shared?
You're going to be really busy, Julie.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
There's like a lot of subcommittees that you're on now.
I'm okay with that.
I feel like I attended
on
the
it.
I
conference.
know. I'm like, woo!
You're like, I need a break.
It is.
I know, it was a lot. But, you know, I've been thinking about this. I'm like, I've got to present this before it fades from my mind.
Well, I think it's really relevant, especially the design guidelines, because as long as I've been sitting on the commission, Greg has been asking, are there guidelines?
Yeah.
Like, from like the very first day that I sat in, like, aren't there like guidelines or something that we can all reflect on that is the same? That we're not like, oh, here's this piece of information and here's this piece of information, and then putting it together, especially as a non-professional historic preservationist. Everybody does a really, really good job, but it's hard if you're not really in the industry to really understand the nuances. And then when we have to bring them up, and then it's like brand new, or, it's not as, if they had a document, that they had in beforehand that kind of gave them some guidance for the stakeholders. I think that's a really good idea.
Thank you.
Just as an aside, we do, or did have a newsletter. It was called the Preservation Post. And Jackie was in charge of that, and commissioners provided articles for it. And it ran for a long time, and it kind of became one of the COVID casualties. But Preservation Post was really a nice...
Bring it back.
A nice way of, so we don't really have to reinvent that wheel.
Okay.
So we do have some extant.
So maybe regroup with this commission to know what was in there.
As long as we got Andy a little longer, so we got to keep bringing all this up.
Maybe we could invite former commissioners to be contributors.
I think that's a great idea.
And that is a way of keeping, you had Let's Connect. That would be a way of keeping former members who are immensely talented in the loop. And just like when we saw it when former Chair Alex Gall came. And thank you, Julie.
Yeah, so I do want to propose these subcommittees. So the first one I'm happy to chair. If there are other people, the first one being the design guidelines, getting people together to figure out what we want from that effort.
Would you be open to putting that on next month's?
Sure. Yeah, I just don't want it to get lost.
With the idea that people will be considering membership in that time, and that we'll formally organize them.
Okay, that'd be great. Just whatever subcommittees we're on here, then we can talk about them and decide if we want to or not.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I'll look at that Arches program, since I do have, as you all know, like I have everyone has the access actually, and anyone who's listening on the bigger thing, the DAP has a website of all of the historic sites. It's free. You do not have to be a professional. You can just log in. You can see them. You can see the districts. It might even be as simple as maybe working with DAP to do something more specialized here in our county with some of the information that they already have, and working with what we already have.
Yeah, because I think for me, I was hoping to have, we're not just Vancouver, right? We're all of...
Right, we just did Washougal, right?
Right.
It's beautiful.
Right, and we do have a map, like when you go into our website, we do have, there are pinpoints of all the properties. But there's one more layer, I think, that would be helpful, which is, having the whole neighborhood and knowing in that whole neighborhood what properties are designated. So you can see that one's not, that one is, that one is, that one's not. And you get a sense of, okay, that neighborhood has various...
And you can do these things nowadays called story maps, which kind of walks the reader through those experiences, like walks you through the neighborhood.
Right. There's a lot of that's the gap analysis, I guess you could say, seeing what we do have, because we do have things in place. And I was impressed, and I was really proud of I shared with my colleagues that I met there our app that we have, our historic preservation app that we have, and they were very impressed with it too. So we do have a lot of great things, but I think there's some gaps that we could see where they are and what we can do to do those things. So, thank you for letting me present. Thank you for your time. And
thank you.
You did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And also thank you for providing a hard copy with all that information.
Right.
we did get that.
Oh, good, okay.
That's what happened.
Sure, okay.
So, we did receive your,
Oh, okay,
your
good.
presentation.
So that's why we're like, sometimes we're like.
That's why we were pouring over it was,
Are you guys watching your phones? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
no, we were not,
No, no,
actually.
no, not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. On to an item of old business. Bart and Jason will now give an update about the historic property demolition program review.
And Jackie, I can take the screen and pull up the memo if you don't mind.
Hard to. And thanks, Jackie, for doing the slides for me.
Of course.
There we go. Okay. So, if folks can remember, way back in the July meeting, we had a wonderful PowerPoint from former Chair Alex Gall about a whole plethora of concerns regarding demolition of historic properties all around the county. He focused a lot on the city of Vancouver, but all around the county, and properties that are outside of the registers that we have any jurisdiction over, and how information is being lost in the demolition of these properties. And so we all listened to the presentation. I won't go through his PowerPoint again. It's available on the previous meeting if people want to look at it again. But the takeaway from that was that we would have a take a look back at the work that had already been done, because as a new staff person to this committee, I was not aware of the consultant work that had been done, and Greg in particular was informing us about, you know, his memories of what had been done and where things had been left off. And so staff was tasked at the end of that meeting with kind of a little summary and background. So for last month's meeting, we prepped this short memo, kind of on piggybacking onto the consultant's memo, which is attached to it. Again, there's a lot there. Don't have any intention of regurgitating all of it, but the point is that there was a grant. The grant money was used to hire a consultant in 18 and 19. The consultant produced a very useful document that had some summaries of other jurisdictions, approaches to regulations for demo of historic properties, and then summary of this county's process, as well as some kind of soft recommendations, if you will, to, you know, directions that one could take if you had the political will to do so. I have some bullet points there where my key takeaways from their memo, that there could be clarification of the local SEPA review for historic resources. There could be a more definite determination of criteria for demolition review triggers. What would trigger this harder look? You know, age, location, the potential to be listed, such as being on our inventory, that kind of thing. Getting a little deeper, their formal demolition review process could really be implemented, possibly at the county level, possibly at the city level. You know, there could be more definite allocation of roles and responsibilities, and there could be more consideration of demolition alternatives, including what some jurisdictions have done, which is an actual delay, or more outreach, kind of along the lines of what Julie was just talking about, you know, preservation initiatives, reaching out to neighborhoods to get buy-in from the stakeholders and landowners, that kind of thing. So, all good stuff, all in the memo, described in much more detail than I could give it justice to in this short amount of time. And I think the point of what Susan and I and Jason took away from that discussion was to bring this back to the attention of the HPC and to get the conversation going in a more active way again. We are not at a point where we are pushing any particular policy. That I don't see that as our role. And Jason was good enough to be here and wanted to talk about it last time, but the meeting ran long, so he came back and he very much wants to be part of this conversation, keep city staff and decision makers in the loop in all of this. I think the idea being that there could be no changes, especially code changes, without really strong buy-in from everyone. And so there's probably the need for, if not a subcommittee, then some definite further discussion in this group to get a real handle on what people want to push forward and allocate some responsibilities. Because this is, the more you start thinking about what this would involve, especially some of these other jurisdictions, these are code changes. These are things that maybe would take years and a lot of outreach to do, to get things into the building code process and the permitting process. So maybe there's some other outreach and softer things that could be done on the interim to get the information captured that we talked about that was getting lost. And with that, I'd love to hear Jason's 2 cents on this. And he's been so patient, and then any input from the members here, and I'm taking notes and listening to the audio later on. So,
am I on?
I think they're on all the time, so you're just hot.
You just got to get close to it.
No, that was a really good summary, Bart, and thank you. And I came on board right when I believe the DAP study was complete, and then, like a lot of things, became a victim of COVID and got put on the back burner. I'm glad we're revisiting it. I think it warrants discussion. I think we were headed on the right track in terms of at least forming a demo subcommittee to talk more about it. I think that's a good next step. I do think a couple of the things Bart pointed out about, you know, political will to do some of this, that's a very real aspect of all of this, because to his point, some of these suggestions or recommendations would require code changes, because the way the demolition process, at least for the city, works now, it's a ministerial process whereby you do X, Y, and Z, and we give you the permit. There's no discretion involved. So if you were going to do some of these things, that would require changing of code, which the legislative action, which would take some time. In the city of Vancouver, we only do code changes. We kind of bundle them, and we do them once a year around October or November of every year. So just big picture thinking, if we were going to do that would kind of be how that would happen. I do think there are some things we could look at doing immediately, like recommendation number 3, where at the very least, if the building is over 50 years old, or I think there was some suggestion of 45 years, that we would require photo documentation. That could be added to the record. To me, that seems like a very easy thing, a jumping off point where we could do that right away. I mean, I think we would work with our existing demolition process where we would require the applicant, as part of the demo checklist, to submit elevation images, maybe a floor plan, maybe enlarged images of specific, aspects of the building that we would want to see. That could still fall in line with the ministerial process, and then we could add that to the county records, Wizard, et cetera, so there's record of it. I know that was a concern of Alex, that there was once the building is gone, where's the record of the old building? And I would echo his concerns. I would want to see a record of that. So I think that is something I see we could do right away, but definitely would want to discuss that more with you all. Yeah, I'm just happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, since we have two new subcommittees in the offing, maybe we should have historic property demolition index or review process, get some interested commissioners to join on that, with the idea that they could assess what could reasonably be done. And I liked your idea about having a jumping off point and, you know, of the key recommendations to develop a review process. Would, if that could be accomplished, that would go a long way to seeing that this is another one of the gaps that we have to address. And so, Julie, I was thinking about the recommendations you had. There may be a place for the historic property demolition program review to be in the Why Preserve presentation.
Yeah, I'm thinking that same thing.
And that if you were going to bring Why Preserve up with elected officials, other policymakers, that would be a natural entree. So I'm trying to think of how we could consolidate some of these subcommittees. So the Make HPC Great subcommittee would be would be one that could include several of these things, so that we don't dilute the scarce time that volunteer commissioners have to devote, and so that maybe one of the things we could do in the formation of these subcommittees is to have a needs assessment to prioritize what members think could and should be done sooner than later. And it's a prime time to do that, given that we have two brand new commissioners whose energy and enthusiasm we need.
Jason, would you be on that subcommittee with commissioners? Would we have you as a resource?
Absolutely.
I think it would also be helpful to, like, here's where a code change would need. Here's where we could do it without a code change. You know, be able to kind of identify those critical pieces to be proactive for legislative change and very proactive for what we can do now. And that committee could come with you, like you were saying, you kind of need to have that discussion.
Julie, if you could speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, did you hear any of that?
No, I mean, I read your lips. I'm getting
really
good at it.
No, I thought I spoke really loudly. I was just saying, could he be part of the subcommittee to offer guidance and clarification about when code changes were needed in the steps that we have outlined here, and when they aren't needed and they could just be moved forward, and how that would look? That was all. Just asking for his partnership in that. Yeah.
Not to be all by ourselves.
Right.
And I think the idea would be that for any of these subcommittees, at least one staff person would be assigned to that.
Okay.
So yeah, don't be concerned about that. We would want to be part of the process.
Like Julie, last year when we were on the subcommittee for grants.
Yeah. Okay.
They sat in and helped with us and answered any questions.
That was going to be my example too.
Yeah. So I'm all for that. I'm all for volunteering for whatever that subcommittee is. I could even chair that committee. I'm not that afraid of code changes or politicians or any of those things, or the longevity. You know, like, it might take years to make some of these changes. It might take years to make design guidelines, but if we can start some of these processes and really get them going, you know, when, you know, some of us have reached our mark, even if we haven't gotten there, everything's well underway, and hopefully there's no more pandemics in the way of progress and preservation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all sounds great. And I was thinking too, when Julie was doing her presentation, that just by doing some of the proactive outreach she's talking about, that might help solve some of the issues that Alex brought up in terms of people demoing homes that they might not even be aware that there's some historical significance there, or, you know, so to your point, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about doing are interrelated.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason and Bart. Our sole item of new business, and I will make it brief, follows on.
I know, it's right on their shirt tail.
It is the perfect opportunity to hitchhike. on the wish for why preserve and outreach and community involvement, that this is something I'd like fellow commissioners to seriously consider, that April Busby, who's the program director at the Clark County Historical Museum, called me to remind me that in November, the speaker series will feature the Historic Preservation Commission. And so as the marquee group for whom a friendly audience will assemble, it would be a key opportunity for us to take this outreach and why preserve and communications and connections out for a spin. And thinking about the needs assessment I mentioned, we could make it interactive rather than just making it 45 minutes of sit and get, that we'd say that we would like to have the people who attend who are the most interested and activist and interested of community members who are members of the museum. They would probably really appreciate being asked. And that this would be a key opportunity for new commissioners to become a part of this outreach. And so I would like to assemble as many folks who would be available, and it would be the Thursday following our November meeting. And so it will follow on. And so we would have a message, and even if every commissioner could have a brief presentation about what they hope to do with their role and what would be their goal or objective for their commissionership. So I want folks to seriously think about participating. And again, this would be an ideal opportunity to carry out the proposed subcommittee objectives. So it came at a, Julie, thank you for precipitating my humble request with a dynamic reason to do so. So Elaine and Heidi, and I'd like you to think about that, and I will be making requests for participation. And so I think that's
Chair, is this something that you want to coordinate yourself directly with individuals or run through staff?
I think maybe we need to have a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
So the answer is both. I think would be good. And the other thing is that if more than if we have a quorum of commissioners present in the same building on a Thursday night, we have to say it's a special meeting.
Yes.
We could look into that.
Thank you, Jackie.
You'd have to
and
be cognizant of that.
Just waiting for that.
Yes, and keeping in mind the notice requirements, that was my other reason for bringing it up 2 months in advance, so that we would be able to satisfy.
I knew there was a reason why 2 attorneys were on the call tonight.
To have just notice. So
yeah. Well, maybe we can discuss this more at our agenda setting meeting in a couple weeks.
And we'll make Jan Bader the chair of this subcommittee. And with that, I conclude and move to good of the order. And I would like to thank everyone for attending and your communication, and thank Julie for the presentation, and thank staff for their patience and forbearance, especially Jason, who had a long time in the green room before he got to talk to us about demolition. So those are my good of the order comments. Any other good of the order remarks? Okay. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Been moved by Greg Foos to adjourn.
I'll second that.
And seconded by Morgan Fraser. It's been moved and seconded that our meeting be adjourned. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.